Welcome back to the Quantum Podcast, people of the internet. My name is Ethan Morland, and I aim to speak to high performers about the hows and the whys behind what they do and break it down with them to help create lessons for you listeners to take away and learn from. On today's episode of the podcast, I have on a really interesting guest. He is a bobsled athlete, a former American footballer, and his name is Elliot Markuson. So in this episode, we cover everything from growing up with a dad who is a high performance coach at college level football. We also talk about his transition from American football to then moving on to becoming a bobsled athlete, how that came around, how anyone can even get into bobsled. We talk about his career on the side of being a bobsled athlete, how he moved to China for a year, all these really interesting things. And Elliot is full of great insights into high performance, and yeah, just a really great guy. Can't thank him enough for his time. Yeah, when I sort of came into contact with Elliot and I saw his page and I saw that he was a bobsled athlete, I was like, I've got to get this guy on, because it's a sport that is so overlooked. We don't really know too much about it, you know, in terms of the general population. And from sort of that sort of performance background, I was so interested in the ins and outs of the sport. So Elliot explains all that, and it's really insightful episode. Hope you all enjoy this episode with Elliot Markuson. Remember to check his stuff out in the link in the description, and also like, subscribe, share the podcast with anyone who may be interested. Enjoy. Okay, Elliot, so I came across you on Instagram, obviously, was really interested in what you're doing, because I think the sport it's a crazy sport with not enough media recognition. That I was like, because we'll get into that sort of stuff, but do you want to tell people who you are, what you do?
Yeah. What's up, guys? I'm Elliot Markuson. I'm 28 years old. I'm from the United States. I'm from the state of Mississippi, so I'm a Southerner, and I am on Team USA bobsled push athlete. And yeah, like you said, the sport's crazy. A lot of people know the sport from the movie Cool Runnings, which kind of does it's not a real interpretation of what we do. It's kind of like a Disney, kind of a fun kid version. It's a super niche sport. Our community around the world is very small, and we're a very tight-knit group, and we know athletes from all the other countries. So we're very it's like a one big family.
It's such a cool sport, because like I said before, like me being from sort of like that sports background, I appreciate what it takes to be a very, very good athlete, and, you know, like the sort of key performance indicators of the sport. It's so fascinating, but we'll sort of build from the ground up. So tell me about your sporting background and sort of what you did growing up.
Yeah, man. I played American football growing up. My dad is actually a American football coach from the college world. So, man, as long as I can remember being a little kid, growing up, SEC football games on the sideline, and you know, my mom's a teacher too, so a family of educators and coaches, and so obviously high school tri-sport athlete, soccer, or for you know, everyone else outside of American football, and track, and then, you know, American football. Then I graduated high school and played college football at the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss, and spent 5 years there. And then when I got done playing, I knew I wasn't going to go to the NFL. When I graduated, I moved to China, where I lived for a year, and as a transition, and taught and coached American football over there. And then I moved back right before COVID. And as soon as I got back to the United States, a coach and a friend of mine reached out and was like, hey, you know, I don't know where you are in your athletic career, but, you know, USA Sports recruits from kind of like old athletic pools that transition into, especially winter sports, because we don't grow up training to do bobsled, right? That's what the Germans and the Austrians and the Swiss do. The Americans don't do that. So I applied and got accepted to a show first called The Next Olympic Hopeful on NBC. COVID ruined the show. They canceled it. And I just remember thinking, I was like, I still want to do this. I still want to try to apply myself and see if I could, you know, do this sport, which would be kind of cool. And so I reached out to a couple of athletes at the time that were on the team, and then my coach, who would inevitably invite me to my rookie camp, and he was like, yeah, man, I remember you from the application, and he was like, I would love for you to, do a virtual combine, get on some of these interview calls, just to make sure you're kind of a good fit for the team. And then, if we like you, you'll hear back from us. And this is like October of 2020, I think. So it's prime COVID, like everyone's going kind of mad. And I was about to go to work actually, and I hadn't heard back from this coach in like a month, and I was like, I guess I wasn't good enough. And he called me and he said, hey man, have you not been getting my emails? And I was like, no, what emails? And he said, man, I've been emailing you for 2.5 weeks to get this paperwork done. He's like, I need you to drive from where you're living to upstate New York to start your rookie camp for bobsled. It's a 17.5-hour drive. And he's like, I need you to be here by next Friday. Oh, my God. So I was like, let's go. Let's just do it. So that's really kind of what perpetuated the journey, and it's kind of how I got started.
That's crazy. So we'll go back to that pursuing football. Obviously, American football is one of probably the hardest sports in the world to make it pro. Like, the turnover of athletes that actually do become professional is probably less than 1% of all who try.
Yeah, I think it's 0.06%,
which is crazy. It's such a crazy number. Mm-hmm. But to play at college, obviously, it's a very high level. Like the standard of college athletics, college football, what have you, in America is exponentially higher than the rest of the world. So how did you sort of go? Were you still, so when you got to college level football, were you still trying to pursue that career to the NFL?
No, I think, I've always had really like reasonable and explicit expectations for myself. And, going into it, I knew college football was going to be the end of playing football for me. I was still considering coaching at the time or becoming an athletic director. So kind of more on the coaching administrative side, which is still a possibility for me, kind of in the future. But, as for playing in the NFL, I kind of told myself, like, man, like, these are going to be your 4 and 5 years left of playing college football. Enjoy them, love them, and be ready to transition when it's over, which it's kind of a big thing for a lot of players nowadays. It's hard to transition out. Like a lot of we had a guy come from the NFL Players Association, and he came and spoke to us, and he said, a lot of college football players that don't make that 0.06% that go on to the NFL, it's like getting out of the military. They don't really have an identity after the sport, and so a lot of them, it's a hard transition. But thank God, I had a great support system around me, my family, my coaches, mentors, friends, and then my opportunity to go live overseas. That was a big, I guess, catalyst. I guess you could say it helped me to transition into that life of like, oh, here's your sport, but here's a world that exists in international sport that I had no idea, and helped me kind of on this trajectory in bobsled in my career and what I do now.
Interesting. So obviously when you're in college and you realize that football isn't the pursuit, and you're not yet at that point of, bobsled and these winter sports, what was it that you were trying to pursue during college? Because obviously you've said there, like, you had four and a bit years where you were like, this is just my time to enjoy it. But obviously you're probably looking ahead from those 4 years, like, I need to get some things in place ready for finishing. So what were you pursuing during that time?
Yeah, a lot of the time, I want to say I was really forward thinking, but most of the time, man, I was focused on playing football, drinking beer, and hanging out with my buddies, right? Like, but I did have things in place, organizations and networks that I kind of went out of the way to get, I guess, into or a part of, to kind of set myself up, after football was done. And man, like, I want to say, it wasn't because of me. It was because of all those that invested me along the way. And I would say the biggest thing was I just keep showing up every day. It's just to everything, and I would say yes to opportunities that I didn't even really know what the return was, and then come to find out years later, like, that those opportunities paid dividends. And so my advice, especially now to young, college players, is, the game that you're playing, the sport you're doing, whether it be, soccer, football, basketball, rifle, whatever you're doing, track, apply yourself, love the sport, but then grow yourself outside the sport. Maybe working with media relations or the administration or being involved on campus, because those networks are what will set you up outside of the sport.
Yeah, it's because it's not just there. It seems to be a thing, especially in the UK. So, for example, I used to work in semi-pro football, soccer back in the UK. And there was a few lads who I'd spoken to, and so basically the way it works in, European football is you can go into an academy from like the age of 5, and they can be in the academy until you get to, say, scholarship, which is like 16 years old. They'll basically go to a college which is associated with a football club, and it's basically they start believing, oh, this is going to be my career because they're earning a bit of money. And then a lot of them, this is their entire identity. They go to these colleges where it's not like you're not getting serious qualifications. You may be just getting like some bits on here and there where it's not going to set you up for, a decent job outside. So they're giving 110% to football, and then they get to 18 where they can then go to a professional contract or a development contract, and clubs go, no. So they've literally, everything around them just drops, and a lot of these lads end up like, just didn't know what to do, because then they have to take up semi-pro and a part-time job where they're like, I'm just stuck. So it's interesting to hear that, you were putting things in place as you were going, because obviously a lot of people are just so focused on the end goal that sometimes it blinds them to the fact that that can't necessarily be the end goal, if that makes sense.
Right. And I think another mindset I had was, I look at my life in terms of chapters and peaks, and I kind of learned this from other people that are and will continue to be more successful than me. And they look at their lives in different, mountain peaks, different chapters, right? So, high school, whatever, young adult, peak, college football, college athletics, peak. And then once that peak ends, you got to come down, and then you got to go find that next thing immediately, because that will end for you one day. And I feel like the people that can have that conversation with themselves earlier rather than later, and and it's not to say that, you're not going to make it. It's just saying that, like, hey, if this doesn't work out, I'm prepared, and I can walk away happy at the end because I gave it all I could, and I did all I could do to be a better man or woman, and I used my platform to get there. And now I can move on to the next peak of my life, with open arms and a smile on my face. I think it's a hard talk, it's a humbling talk, but those who've kind of, self-identified, self-realization through that, it's paid dividends.
Oh, 100%. And then, so you mentioned you were thinking of getting into coaching football. Yeah. So why did you decide not to pursue that eventually?
Like I said, my dad's a college football coach. I grew up around the game my whole life. And it's kind of a hard life in the United States. To be an American football coach in the college level, you move a lot. It's hard to have a family, and your life is very public. People are, I remember going to school as a kid and, people saying like, why is your dad, doing so bad as a coach? And, I was 12 years old. I didn't know. I'm still playing Pop Warner football, but it's a hard life, and it's for those that are super dedicated. And for me, it was more of like, what's out there beyond the game of football. I wanted to travel. I wanted to see the world. I wanted to meet people like yourself. And sport and football is something I'll always have that I can always go back to. What I won't be able to do my whole life is to kind of travel around the world. Now with bobsled, still compete internationally and meet all these individuals and people from the international sports world that, I wouldn't have met if I would have just stayed coaching football or gone the administration route.
Yeah, it's the coaching route's really interesting because I listened to a bit of a podcast you did previously with one of the guys who used to work with your dad. And I had a look at your dad's wiki page, because obviously it has a list of the places he coached, all over the place. Like you can't settle. You really can't settle when you're doing a career like that, and which I can understand why you kind of were, you wanted to move away from it. But how was that as a kid with, where your dad's constantly moving around, and then like, you're probably just getting settled somewhere, and then he goes, we have to up and move again. How was that for you?
Thankfully, I really only had one move that I can remember, and it was when I was in, the transition from 7th to 8th grade. We went from one SEC school to the next. Growing up, a lot of my friends were like, Elliot, you don't really have a home, man. Like, you never grew up with the same kids that you went through elementary all the way to high school with. Because of that, I had a really unique childhood. I got to do a lot of things that other kids didn't really have the privilege to do, and for that, I'm really grateful and I'm thankful. I have an older sister, and it kind of formed us as kids, right? To go to my dad's games and be on the sidelines and to meet all these great people, and all the guys that worked with my dad, they were like mentors and other father figures for me. So I got to see what success looked like at a very young age, and how great men and leaders treat people around them, and it was very impactful for me. Whereas at the cost was we moved, and I remember I think it was late spring. I was in 7th grade, and my dad coming and picking me up from school, and was like, "Hey man, like I need to tell you before it comes out on the news, but we're leaving. We're moving to a different state. We'll be leaving in a few weeks, so you have to go home and start packing your stuff." And that was pretty hard on me as a kid, because I just wanted to hang out with my friends from the neighborhood, right? And but in the end, it was worth it, because it helped. Those connections and those bonds through my dad's profession helped, kind of form me into the young man that I am today.
It's really interesting answer that, because I'm fascinated by the fact that even at the college level, it's all over the news for you lot. Like, college football seems to be as big, if not bigger than the NFL itself. Like, so how did you deal with that? Like, your dad being in the news, like a topic of discussion for the general public. Like, how do you even cope with that as a kid?
Oh man, I guess it would be the same. I don't know, but very similar if my parents were politicians. I guess I don't know. I know it was kind of fun because the other coaches' kids that were my age, we just kind of went through it together, and there were a few fights in school, but nothing. Nothing too crazy. And a lot of the friends that we had in the two places that we lived in, Arkansas and Mississippi, were, the families always supported us, and we always had great people around us that kind of gave our family, the space it needed, and kind of that, I guess, privacy as much as you could get, without your parent being an employee of the state, so. And I will definitely say that springtime was better than the fall.
Yeah.
It wasn't a good day to go to school on a Monday after your dad's team lost pretty bad. So
yeah, it's definitely, I can imagine, because as kids, because is it like, so over there? This is just me being completely oblivious to how it works. Mm-hmm. So people support college teams, like kids support college teams. Or are they all mainly just like NFL?
No, man. It really depends on where you're from, but the southern region of the United States, college football is a religion. It's Saturday in the fall. Everyone has their team, and a lot of it, it'll divide families. I guess the best way I could put it to you would be, Manchester United and Liverpool. Right?
So
that's Alabama. That's Alabama and Auburn.
It's funny you say that, because I'm a Liverpool fan, and my entire family are United fans. So when we play each other, they won't speak to me. Will not speak to me day off. And we beat them 7-0 the last time we played them, which is outrageous. And obviously they're all back in the UK, so I just called them up, just like pissing myself laughing on the phone. And my dad just looked at me and was like, just fuck off, don't speak to me. I was like,
Yeah,
just
you're done.
absolute
You're done.
bragging rights. It was so good. But so obviously you were going to pursue coaching, you were going to do all that, you didn't, you moved to China. So
Yeah.
where did that come from, and how was it?
Yeah, man, I'll tell you, my whole life was spent playing football and kind of doing the football route, and I would say it was one of the first decisions that I made, and I had some kind of people I had asked and that mentored me a little bit, and it was one of those first decisions I ever made that was like, man, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know what I'm getting into, but I'm just going to do it because I like doing hard things and I like challenging myself, and I wanted to travel and see the world, and I picked the hardest place to go to. Man, I'm from a small town in Mississippi where, we have 20,000 people, right? I moved to a city with 8 million people, and I'd never been on a subway before, and I can't even speak Chinese when I leave. But, man, China was 14 months of just eye-opening experiences, and not even just living there, but the people that I met from around the world. Some of my two best friends there were from the UK. They were from Liverpool. Just hilarious. And so getting to live with people and work with people completely different from myself, it really broadened my horizon, and the ability to connect with other people, and really showed me that anything's possible, right? It really kind of set the foundation of things that I would take later on with me into bobsled and into my life now as I continue in sport and career.
That initial moment you landed in China, probably, knowing you're not going to be going home for a long time, because I've experienced the feeling of, landing somewhere new and realizing I don't have a return ticket. How was that first moment when you stepped outside and realized there's a massive difference in culture and stuff?
I loved it, dude. I loved it. It was like we had a coach in college. He would give us a quote about the Spanish conquistador when he first landed in Mexico, South America, and he told his guys, he said, once the ships have landed, turn around and burn them because we're not going home. Like, don't give yourself a plan B. Make yourself survive, make yourself thrive, and adapt and become a better human from the situation, because it's not as bad as what your mind perceives it to be. And so I had the same thought when I landed in China for the first time. It was a brand new world. It was like being in a Star Wars movie is what I tell people, because compared to Mississippi, right? There ain't nothing in Mississippi. And I told myself, like, I'm not going to go home. I'm going to be here for 14, 15 months, and I'm going to make the most of it as I can. I'm going to milk it for as much as I can. And I did that, and I made incredible connections and friends, for a lifetime. And really, I had a job teaching at a school, but as soon as I got there, the joke with foreigners in China was that it's the island of misfit toys. So you would just have these people that would show up from every corner of God's green earth that would have these just kind of bizarre backgrounds and life stories. But through that, I met a guy who played American football. He was from the United States, played college football in Michigan, and he started an American football, semi-pro Chinese football league.
Crazy.
And so, and so through him, I got connected and ended up doing a project with the NFL, and they paid to fly my dad out to Shanghai. So
that's incredible,
man. It all works out in the end, man. Like people, and the one thing I got home, and a lot of people were like, "Why would you do that?" Right? Even before I left, they're like, why would you do that? If you want to teach, just stay here. And I was like, no, it's not about teaching. Teaching is just the vector, the method to get me there. What I'm really in for is kind of like what you said at the beginning of this podcast. I'm in for the experience. I'm in for growing myself and making these connections with people from all over the world. I want to be a better man at the end of the day. And sometimes it means doing hard things and making yourself be uncomfortable. And what I had in common with everybody that was there was we all kind of made that decision collectively. So
yeah, it's really a cool decision I'm very sort of fond of, and I really appreciate what it takes to make that decision, because so when I moved out here 8 months ago, it was like it was a thing I was so excited for, but it was also something that in the back of my head I was always like, is it going to work out? Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that?
Yeah.
But you kind of just have to go, like, fuck it, just do it. And because you can't, if you dwell on it, you're never going to make the decision. And then you're always going to sit on it for the rest of your life and be like, should I have done it? Should I have not? I kind of regret it. I never want to regret not making a decision based off the fact that I was like scared, basically.
Right. 100%. Fear, people that make those fear-based decisions, or what I call like in the non-actions of fear, not making the decision will hurt you in the longer term than making a decision. Because you know what, even if you make the decision and it doesn't work out, you fail, or whatever doesn't work out, at the end you can say, I tried and I gave it my all, and I can move on to the next thing in my life and say, you know what, whatever lessons I learned from that experience, I learned them and I can apply them to the next thing. Whereas like if you just sit on the couch and think, what if, then you're one of those coulda, shoulda, woulda guys. Yeah. And the world has enough of those.
It's like sure. So when I did my master's, we did like a placement in industry. So I worked for a rugby team, and I remember getting the call from my uni supervisor at the time, and he said, there's this placement down in London. So I was at uni in Liverpool, and he was like, oh, there's this placement down in London. And I was like, I've always been like overwhelmed by London. It's a very weird place. Everyone's got a place to be. It's very different to what I'm used to. And he was like, there's this placement here if you want it. And I was like, I kind of just got to take it. I don't necessarily know if it's going to work out, but I've got to take it. And I hated every day I was there. Just like, it was because it was so, I don't know, London is probably a bit like New York, like everyone's got a place to be and they'll barge through you if you don't get out of the way. So as much as I hated it, I appreciated the experience. I learned from it, and I realized like this isn't necessarily what I want to do as a career. So I'm glad that I did it, because I think if I'd stayed closer to home, I'd probably have pursued the career and later realized actually this isn't what I want to do. If you get me.
Right. 100%. Yeah, dude. Yeah, 100%. And it gives you that chance to kind of adapt. And the earlier you do it, like you said, you can kind of mold the experience to how you want to interpret it and say like, it is or isn't for me. Let's move on. Right. So that's awesome, man. I have respect for it, dude. Like it's hard. And I'm sure you've had friends and family that say, why are you doing what you do? And that's the hardest voice to listen to. It's not your inner voice. It's the people closest to you.
Yeah.
That say, what are you doing?
To be fair,
you know what I mean?
I have probably the best support network in terms of family, because as soon as I go, oh, this has come up, they did, like when the thing to come to Australia came up, they just went, take it, just do it.
No, that's
like
awesome.
there was no pushback. Like obviously people towards the, like when I was leaving, I remember like people were like, oh, do you have to go? Because it's a case of like, just missing people. But the moment the decision came, everyone just went, do it. Don't ever say no, which, I can always appreciate. So in terms of support networks for you, what was it like? Because obviously your dad works in high performance, your mum's an educator. So what was it, that support network around you like?
Oh man. My dad, I remember telling him first that I took the job and was moving to China. And I remember he kind of said the same thing. He's like, son, like it's a big world and you need to go out and experience it if you want to make big things happen. And I was like, you know what? You're right. Like, I want to make big things happen. I want to do cool stuff, right? Like, I want to be different. I don't want to go work a 9 to 5, live that white picket fence American dream. Like, that's something that our parents here in the United States lived. And for me, it was not something that I really wanted. I wanted to do different things. And so he was really supportive. Now, my mom, on the other hand, she's a little bit more traditional. She's a really kind of small, tiny Southern lady. And I remember calling her up on the phone, and my dad was like, you need to tell her you're leaving. It's been a week. And so I called her up on the phone, and I remember holding the phone this far away from me because she was just, you're going where? What are you going? What do you know about China? You don't speak Chinese. And then finally she warmed up to, me being gone. And once you could show from, sometimes parents, it's like, Mom, I'm okay, I'm safe, I'm doing what I've always been taught to do from you guys as your child, and you as my parents, and so it all works out. And then in football too, my dad was always supportive. I have great parents, man. Like, I'm blessed with great family, great parents. They've always been there for me through every endeavor. They might ask a lot of questions on what I'm doing, but man, like, at the end of the day, they love me and they support me through everything.
Honestly, it makes the world a difference when you got that support network behind you who, like, your dad, where he said you need to go and experience the world, because probably if he'd also said, you can't speak Chinese, you can't do this like your mum did, it would make that decision probably a lot more harder to make.
Right.
So.
Right, dude. Yeah, man. It would have been, I probably wouldn't have gone, really. I mean, he's my best friend and one of my, my biggest mentors. So if he would have been like, nah, man, like, I don't think this is for you, I think I would have hung the cleats up proverbially and just been like, okay, I'm not going. But it's funny you say that too, because of that I went, I just remember there were probably 10 or so people that I talked to, back in the States while I was living in China, that I found out later on after I got home or while I was still there that they had decided to make a step like that too, because they saw somebody doing it. And not just talking about it, not just, critiquing on the internet, but they physically saw me and my friends in China. And I remember one girl, she's like, hey, I'm going to go live in Spain. And she's still living there. And, it was crazy to see. And just, it's like that kind of positive energy of just saying yes to do things. Like you said, like, I'm sure you've got friends back home that were like, man, I'm going to go travel to Australia. I want to go do stuff now. Like, you're living the life, and your life might not. You're like, man, I'm just doing regular stuff every day. I just do it in a different place. Yeah. But to them, it's like, it's the act of saying yes. It's the act of like, I'm going to do hard things because I've never had to do a hard thing in my life.
Yeah, so, it's funny because I have a friend who he was in Melbourne until recently, and I hadn't spoken to him in a few years. But I used to train with him, MMA, and when he was in Melbourne, I was like, oh, I'm coming out, I'll meet up with you. So when I met up with him, we got talking about like why he came out and stuff. And he was like, so one time at training, this is like 3-4 years ago, he asked me, because I'd just taken a trip to Switzerland one weekend just on my own, just to go snowboarding, chill. And he was like, how do you do it? How do you do it? I'm like, just book a flight and go. Just book it and go. And then he was like, when you explained it to me so simply, he was like, I just need to do it. And I was like, it felt so good knowing that I'd helped someone just make that leap to just sort of go and do it. Because for me, like, I remember the first time I did a big trip, it was like, that was hard to do, because it's like, it's a completely different world. But then after that, it's like, just book a flight and just go and just see how it goes. And you might enjoy it, you might not. You just, you run with it and you see what comes of it, kind of thing.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, man. And that's really, like, if I know we're going to get into it, but that sums up bobsled all in one go. Just get in the sled, man. Like, don't make it harder than it needs to be. Just get on the plane, book the trip, have a conversation with somebody around the world that you don't know. Just do it, man, because you don't know what's going to come from it. The connections, the growth that you'll receive on the end of it, dude. You can't put a number on it.
Oh, yeah, 100%. The way you were recruited, through the pooling of athletes, it's really interesting because until I'd come out here, they do it for the AFL, the Australian football. And
right,
it's really, so they recruited a former basketball player, college basketball player, Mason Cox, I think. He'd never played Australian football in his life, and now he plays full-time professional over here. So I was like, that's really interesting. And for you to say that they did the same for you, because I'd always wondered how people get into sports like bobsled, these more, small, you would say smaller sports in terms of coverage, because it's not, and as a kid, you go, I want to be a football player, a basketball player. You don't go, I want to be a bobsled athlete. It's very different. So
Yeah.
When that opportunity came around, how did you feel about it all?
At first, I didn't think it was real. And like you said, it's just such a niche sport that I was like, surely there's professionals that live up in the mountain areas of the United States that do this, have been doing this since, I was playing Pop Warner football when I was, 10, which there's maybe a few, maybe a couple, but really nothing, dude. Like the USA, they recruit from old athletic pools, and the sports that translate the best are a background in American football, a background in track and field, and then there's a couple other like outliers. CrossFit's another one, just pure athletic ability. And what they really look for is it, and because you study sports, it's the transition of athletic prowess. Really, it's like, okay, can you be powerful and strong? Can you function in a team dynamic on the men's side, which 4-man bobsleigh is all team dynamic? Yeah. Can you pay attention to details? And can you commit to something that's bigger than yourself, which is a big one, right? You can pull up any Joe Schmo off the street that, can run a fantastic 40 time, but you can't put him in a team environment ready to compete if he hasn't had that background coming up in team sports. Right. He doesn't know. Right. And that's no fault of his own. It's just, it's something that I don't even know what you would call it. Like, it's like social programming coming up through the layers of sports as a kid. And they do it all over the country, or all over the world. I mean, so it's cool. It's a very unique sport. It's a blessing to do it. It's fun. It's scary as hell.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not gonna lie. Like, if you're not a little, everybody's scared to do bobsled. Anybody that's not scared is a liar. Like, it's just something your CNS is telling you, don't do it. Like, you're going 85 miles an hour, which is 120, 130 kilometers an hour down an icy track, and you're pulling 5 G's of pressure in the back. You pull the same amount of G's as a fighter pilot does in the cockpit, but you do it in a skin tight suit, no protection, and really between the ice. Like, if you fall out of the sled, like, it's just ice. Like, you'll get burned, right? So it's there's nothing in the world like it, dude. Like, I would love to take you down sometime in a bobsleigh.
I would love to try something like that. It'd be crazy.
Some of my good buddies in the international circuits are a couple of the British guys, and they're great dudes. Like, they're fun as hell, and they like to have a good time, and they're just good old proper lads, man. Like, they're a good time. So
yeah, it's a crazy sport. Like, I can imagine, because obviously there's similar G's going through your neck and your back as there is a Formula One driver, which is insane to say. But the first time you went in the bobsled, was your brain just screaming at you like, I can't do this?
Yeah. I mean, it's an experience like no other. Your CNS, like I said, it does. Your brain doesn't know how to process what's going on around you and what you're hearing and what you're feeling. And I have to take motion sickness pills every time I get in the sled, because I get car sick if I'm not looking out the front window of my vehicle. Like, if I'm riding, and I do bobsled, which is funny. My girlfriend as well, she's on the USA bobsled team on the women's side, and we're the same. Like, we both have to take Dramamine to keep us, kind of mellow without throwing up. But dude, it's not. People want to say like, oh, it must be like a roller coaster. Nah, man, like, it's not a roller coaster. It's just so much more intense, and you're shaking, you're vibrating, it's loud. You can feel how fast you're going, and then the G-force is just pressing down on you the whole time. So it's but the longer I've been doing it now, the more composed you can be in the back of the sled, because I'm a push athlete. So there's 2 athletes. There's the pilot, who obviously drives the bobsled, and then the push athlete, the brakeman, is colloquial is what we're called. And we just ride in the back, man. We push the sled, we're the sled dogs, get in, and our job is to ride good, count the curves, and pull the brakes at the end.
It's crazy.
That's it. It's really a simple, like, there's really not much to, compared to American football, where you have to learn a whole playbook and language of its own. and then play in front of 80,000 people. This sport is really, in the term like order of operations, it's really simple. But what plays the biggest effect is your mind, right? Because your mind is saying, man, what if we crash? Because crashing's scary. You can get really hurt every time you get in the sled. Your brain is like, dude, don't get in the sled, man. Like, go enjoy your life, do something else. But every time but it's like an adrenaline spike. It's a high because your brain is telling you this is a hard thing. It's scary. Don't do it. And then you basically have to tell your brain to shut up. And you essentially, in the most purest form, you have to face fear head on. And then when you do it, it's like you come out on the other end, kind of like taking the trip or moving off to another country. You get out of the sled and you're like, let's go again. Let's do it again. Even after you crash, you have to say, I got to get back in the sled and I'm scared as hell. And that's okay.
So when you've obviously crashed, what was the first crash like? Because it's probably, I can imagine it's as crap as it is, it's probably good to get it out of the system and done. But B, what's also the worst crash you've had?
Yeah, I've been in 2 crashes. They were actually back to back, which is really funny. My first crash was in a 2-man bobsleigh, and kind of to back up, as a brakeman, your job is to learn the track that you're sliding on. So you memorize the curves and how the track feels, so you can kind of prepare yourself in the back of the sled, and you know when to pull the brakes at the end because you can't pull them before. And so, last November I was in the back of a 2-man sled, and we were going down a track that I've been down probably 80 times now. So you really just focus on just breathing in the back, just riding good, knowing where you are, just staying calm, keeping your heart rate as low as possible, because as soon as it gets elevated, you're gonna panic, right? And we were coming around a curve, and I could feel my pilot kind of losing control of the sled, and you just kind of feel it slightly. You're airborne, and then your head is on the ice at 80 miles an hour, and you're just, and that's really all you hear. It's really, the sound is what is so disorientating. But then once you kind of understand, like, I'm upside down, the sled's on top of me, I'm on my shoulders on the ice, which we wear a burn vest so we don't get a 3rd-degree burn from the ice. It's like essentially a Kevlar vest, right? And you just kind of hold in there, and you kind of try to keep your heart rate down as low as possible still, and then it ends, and then you try to get out of the sled before the sled starts sliding backwards with you in it.
It's so wild. Like, I can't even imagine that feeling of like realizing you're upside down and your head is just scraping. Obviously you got a helmet on, but it's that probably crunching sound that it goes through me even thinking about it.
Yeah, dude, and there's been some pretty bad ones. I was in a pretty bad 4-man crash, literally the next run right after, and but the cool thing about my first crash was we crashed. I'm like, it's happening. Keep the heart rate down, stay calm. I got out of the sled, and because the bobsleigh track, there's a low point, and the finish dock is actually really high up because you have to deplete the speed as you go up, right? You can't just stop the sled. And so the sled started going backwards, and my pilot was still in the sled, and I'm standing outside the track, and the medical guys are running over. They're like, "Are you good?" And I was like, "Man, I'm good." And this is just an testament to sports and how I was brought up, but I remember getting back in the track and sprinting up the outrun past the finish line. And in my mind, I was kind of banged up a little bit. My head kind of hurt, had a little bit of ice burn, just a little bit. And in my mind, all I could think about was finishing, right? And it just shows you, in somebody who studies sports and high performance, it just shows you it's almost like an indoctrination. It doesn't matter like what your body's willing to essentially endure, but what you've been trained is to overcome an obstacle, right? And I just remember sprinting up the outrun, and my teammates are standing at the finish dock, and they're like, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" And I was like, "I honestly have no idea." My mind just went to autopilot. So
It's that winning mentality, though, isn't it? Like, just by the sounds of it, that is built into you. It's ingrained in in your DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're, preparing for competition, what things are you doing to get yourself there for that, to win every single time?
Yeah, man. The four-man bobsleigh is the ultimate. I would say it's compared to American football and, soccer too. It's the ultimate team sport. It's you and three other guys. You got to warm up and you got to perform and sprint in the coldest of environments. And then you got to get in the sled at the same time and then get in there together and make it a good ride down. And mentally, the hardest part is warming up to do the sprints in the, and I'm from the South. Like, it doesn't snow where I'm from. And then a winter sport where it's nothing but ice, man, that's a challenge to warm up to that. So it's a lot of dynamic stuff, a lot of plyometrics just to get the body going, and then a lot of sprinting. And then headspace wise, man, I try to keep myself in the moment, keep myself grounded, and kind of focus on, I don't ever think about getting down to the bottom of the run. I just think about what I need to do in the next step of the process. So if it's, we got 3 sleds ahead of us, it's, okay, I need to get my helmet on. Okay, what's next? I got to help get my sled to the line. I'm on the line. I need to brush my ice spikes off. When I push the sled, I got to focus on hitting the bunk to get into the sled. I just think in steps of progression, small steps at a time, which will lead to a bigger outcome.
It's so interesting. I love the psychology behind athletes, because I've had really interesting conversations with ultra runners and stuff like that, where they're going, for you, the build up it can be it's a full day, can be you're waiting all day. So if you're not that high performance mentality, you're probably playing in your head and bringing yourself down. And it's with ultra runners, they have that throughout the entire event. And it's interesting because it's still got comparisons in terms of you probably have points where you're oh fuck, I can't do this, I don't know what to do, and then you have to bring yourself back down and be no, I've got it, I've trained, I'm here, yep. I'm just gonna get it done, and I'm gonna do my best, and that's it.
Yeah, dude, 100%. And it is that mentality, because sometimes that little voice in the back of your head says, don't get in the sled, man, don't do it. And then you literally have to tell that voice to sit down, and don't let it have a seat at your table, because that voice will only bring doubt and denial in what you're trying to do. And like I said earlier, a lot of that mentality it's the burn the ships mentality. It's, I'm here for a reason, I'm not going back. The only way to go is forward. And if that brings, hardship and pain and, at times, suffering from crashing, it's worth it, because at the end, the outcome, the potential outcome far outweighs not doing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. So the last game of football you played to the first bobsled competition you did, was there a difference in your approach, or did it feel like you'd never left competition?
I think it was more of I never left competition, but it was different. The atmosphere changed, the environment changed, but it was still this, a lot of people like to call it different things. Some people call it a dog mentality. Some people call it the competitor's edge. I just relate it to ready to be in a fist fight, right? It's you're ready to attack whatever you need to do to compete and to win. And at the end of the day, it might not even be all about winning, but it's about representing something bigger than yourself and being accountable to something and somebody that isn't yourself. And the highest achieving athletes and people I know in my life are people who have taken that concept and have really made it in their own and their identity, of saying what makes me successful is when I know that I'm accountable to other people, and I know how to represent and be a part of something that is and will always be bigger than me. And taking that lesson and applying it to everything, it's helped in so many things. But at the end of the day, man, it's a blessing. I remember I remember sitting on the line before my first race, and I was thinking to myself, man, I was thinking about the same scenario between my last football game, and I was like, if somebody would have told me back in 2017 in the fall that I was going to be a bobsledder for USA, I probably would have slapped them because I wouldn't have believed them. And, a few years later, here I am after a trip to the end of the world and back. And then here I am still competing and doing a great sport. And man, it's a God thing, man. Like I can't put it into words how blessed I've been. But given the platform that I have now and the opportunity, I just want to keep making the most of it and just keep inspiring and helping people come up along the way that, just say yes to doing hard stuff, because you don't know what will happen at the end. Like if I would have said no to driving 17 and a half hours to Lake Placid and, by the end of the week.
Where would you be now? What would you be doing?
Exactly. And through the sport, I've made, friends for a lifetime, international and here in the program. I met my girlfriend now. Like it is a blessing, dude. It is a hard sport, but at the end, it's
worth it though. Worth it.
Yeah.
So that it's interesting you say. So you met your partner through obviously bobsled. So you're both elite athletes.
Yeah.
So how is that? Because obviously you're not just going out for like drinks and stuff like that. Like you're probably both like regimented, going to bed at this time, doing this. I've got this at this time. Like, how do you both cope with the both of you being professional?
She is awesome, dude. She is a rock star. And I would say like she is more of an accomplished athlete than I am, right? Like, and I have no shame in admitting that. Like she was a Division I hurdler in college, so she comes from the track background where I'm football. So we have conflicting ideas on training and regiment. So all the time we're kind of like, yeah, well, what if we do this? And so it's really funny. And it's our off season now, and so we were doing our workout yesterday, and we were like, well, what do we really do? We don't know what to do now in our off season because we're so used to sticking to a pretty tight schedule and training regiment. Now we can kind of ease off a little bit, but man, she's awesome, and I think it's really unique that we get to do the sport together, and not a lot of people can say that. So that's
it. Literally, it's like how many people can say they do the same sport together, basically on the same team. Like it's crazy. But you mentioned the off season there. Mm-hmm. So what do you do with your off season? Because obviously you've got to maintain a level of ability, but you also need to take time away because otherwise you'll just get eventually, could be a month, could be a year, you'll end up burned out. So what do you do in that time?
Man, it's a fine balance, and I'm still trying to learn the balance. Football, I was really used to just hammering away all the time. Hammer. We're going to lift heavy, and we're going to condition. It doesn't matter if it's spring, summer, or in season. Whereas this sport, I have to kind of take my ego and put it aside, and I have to learn more from our track teammates who are more used to taking that time off in the off season and really tailoring a specific program to the athletic movement that they're doing. So it's literally two conflicting ideas of training, right? Which is cool because I've learned so much from it. So during in-season and building up, like right before, it's a lot of explosive work, plyometrics, heavy lifts, heavy dynamic lifts. And then off-season now, it's more of just maintain and conditioning. So we can kind of cross-train a little bit more. We're not really focused as much on sprinting. We can really kind of get back into that, that summer shape that I need to get back in. It's been a long winter, my man. So actually, we're leaving to go to Belize in the morning, actually. So just spend some time on the beach, get some sun, and come back and just be outside.
Refreshed.
Yeah, dude, that's it. Because like you said, they're guys that'll train and they'll keep sprinting and doing all that stuff year round, and they just get burned out and their bodies can't handle it because it is a physically demanding sport.
Obviously, so the sport itself, if we look at it from sort of key performance indicator, you need to be powerful, as powerful as possible. You need to be strong, but you also need to be fast because obviously that to push the sled, but also to be able to sprint as fast as you can in that initial phase.
Yep.
So what kind of, so obviously you mentioned there that you do a lot of plyometrics, sprinting, heavy strength training, but so how do you split up your week in terms of training?
Yeah, and everyone's got their different methods. Um, During the season stuff, like right before the season or kind of the end of the summer, before we kind of get into our team testing, I mean, we're sprinting a lot. I mean, it's, at least 3 times a week, and then lifting really 2, with a big emphasis on, the power movements, power clean, all the different variations of that. I'm still a big proponent of deadlifts. So all the deficit deadlifts, banded deadlifts, really anything to kind of tease out those different muscle groups. And then obviously the plyometrics, man, like depth jumps, anything with the med balls. And we do a lot of work with the prowlers, so the sled pushes, before we can get on the ice at our ice house. But it's a lot. And everyone, like I said, everyone's kind of got their different sauce, their different method on what they do. And the cool thing about the sport is there's no one size, fits all for the different athletes. The pilots might be doing something. The women, they might be doing something. My girlfriend, she might be doing something different than what I'm doing and what I'm working on. She's more of a established sprinter than I am. So I really have to focus more on my sprinting technique. It's kind of the thing that I've been working on a lot recently, whereas coming from American football, we don't sprint, dude. Like we don't do none of that. Mechanically, why? Like in terms of mechanics. So yeah, it's a lot. It's fun though. It's fun because we can kind of mix and match, working with our strength staff up at the training center, and they help us out a lot too. So
it's interesting because obviously sprinting it's an art of its own. Like we look at it as if like, oh, anyone can do that.
Yeah,
but when you really break it down into the different phases of the sprint, it's so hard to get right because I've had to teach. We used to go through sprint technique with athletes, and it's really interesting to understand that actually like not everyone gets sprint technique. They don't get that actually there's more to it than just going as fast as you can. So for you, how is it being a beginner at something like that? Obviously you're a beginner at bobsled, but then you've gotten more and more proficient with it, but you're still, like you say, sprinting's still your main thing that you need to work on. So how has it been a beginner with that?
Man, it's humbling, and I find myself a lot of the time is checking my ego at the door because what I understand is I can't get better at something if my ego gets in the way, and that's okay because I think a lot of high performers realize that like somebody else has the keys to victory that I need to be taught, and I need to apply them. And if I can't do that, then I'll never be successful. A lot of our teammates are high-performing sprint athletes. One of them, one of my good friends, he ran in the Summer Olympics as a sprinter. And so learning from him for free too, like that's invaluable knowledge of him breaking down the sprint, the different phases, and really focusing on what I'm doing. And I'll give you like a key indicator for me. Now I really focus on is power output into the ground and long strides at the beginning, the first 5-10 meters. Just levering those steps out and putting as much force back out into the ground as possible. Whereas a lot of people see sprinting and they just think, how fast can I pick my feet up and turn them over? Which in reality, the best sprinters are generating an enormous amount of force and covering a lot of ground in as few steps possible. And so that is all applicable to pushing the sled on the ice. It's just force down into the ground and out and away and at long steps and making it as efficient as possible.
Do you train much of the triple flexion of the sprint? So do you do any strengthening work for that? Like, the hip flexors and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I would say the most common and prevalent injury in the sport, besides getting a little bit of ice burn here and there, is people, working on their hips and their hip flexors and the triple extension. Like, it is so demanding pushing the sled because you really have to focus on getting your triple extension right off of the block. And it, especially during summer training, it starts to wear on you. So a lot of the stuff I do now that, my girlfriend's been great. She's been teaching me a lot of triple extension work and hip work. And it's humbling, but it's fun though. It's a challenge. And at the end, kind of the overarching theme, do hard things, and it'll make you better in the end. So
Yeah. As from like the coaching perspective, I'm just interested in this. What sort of testing parameters do you do? Like at the start of the pre-season, what sort of testing stuff will you go through?
Yeah, our federation's kind of changed their testing standards. We used to have a combine, but now they've changed it to a push standard. So we have an indoor ice house that we push on, which you can see. I can send you videos later of what it kind of looks like. But we have to meet, certain times, and they want to see different criteria. So when you program, you want to be able to peak within your programming at that date. So you're at the top of physical fitness, speed, and power at that date. So you can put up great numbers. And then on the men's side, based off those numbers, you get kind of put into a four-man team to push with as a group, as a team. And that's really kind of what you're looking for. So have a good individual push, which means peaking at that time in the late summer from your programming. Get put on a good group for four-man push, and then putting up good times and velocities. And then from there, that's kind of how you get up to the upper echelons of the pilots. And but I will say too, like, it's a marathon, man. Like, we measure our success in groups of 4 years. Whereas, like, some athletes, most teams and athletes measure their success in one season. A lot of our success is built in a quad, or every 4 years per Olympics. So everybody on the team, their goal is to make the Olympics, right? Like, there's no reason that there's nobody on the team that'll tell you that's not the goal. If it's not the goal, then why are you here, right? But it's humbling, because you have to say to yourself, like, this is a marathon, man. Like, I can't just be out. I'm not going to make the Olympic team tomorrow. I got to keep working, keep hammering away, keep improving, because there's always something. Whether that be sprint mechanics, pushing the sled on the ice, loading the sled, being a better teammate in the garage, learning how to work on the sleds, because that's a big thing too. A lot of people don't know is out of 100% of the time, we only really slide on the ice maybe 15%. The rest of the time is working on the sleds and moving them around. It's a lot of equipment. It's expensive. So just being the best teammate and support, in the garage and around the pilots as you can. That's where a lot of people kind of fall off the ladder, or they can, because they might be the best athletes, but they suck at being a teammate.
So on that, what is it to be a good teammate?
Kind of just knowing how to move the sleds, knowing kind of what your pilot needs, kind of anticipating, how to align the blades on the sleds, which are called runners, how to race align them, how to work on them, how to handle them. A four-man sled can cost up to $300,000, and then a set of runners or the blades can cost up to 50 to 60 grand per set of four. So it's very important to be very careful with them, learning how to sand them correctly, and it's just attention to detail is the overarching thing. And if you can be a good brakeman and a good teammate in the garage, have great attention to detail, help your pilot out as much as possible, because the pilot, he's the dude taking you down safe. Like, on race day or a training day, the last thing you want him to worry about is, man, I hope the runners are put on correctly. Like, dude, you need to drive the sled, man, because I'm in the back and my well-being is in your hands. Like, so, yeah.
That's so interesting. I didn't think it would, like, I don't know what number I had in my head, to be honest, of how expensive it would be to take part in the sport. But because I wanted to ask this as well, so it's probably a good time to get onto it. In terms of funding, what is it good for? Do you get good funding for this kind of sport, or is it like on the lower end in terms of compared to other Olympic sports?
Yeah, well, I would say we're on the lower end. USA Bobsled is not a rich federation. We don't have much. We have some small sponsors, and if you're the top athletes on the team per season, based off the testing criteria, you'll get a small stipend every month and your travel paid for. But all the rest of us, man, like, we're self-funded. We have jobs. We have our personal sponsors. So we really are citizen athletes, man. Like, we have two different lives, and we live two different lives. And I think it's cool that way, because, that's what it was like being a student athlete in college. But it does get harder the older you get, and you're like, man, I'm trying to buy a house, like I'm trying to do stuff, I'm trying to travel still, and you got to think about bobsled too in your career, and so yeah, it's cool. So I'm always looking for like new sponsors and people to work with in collaboration. I've had a couple before, so it's great, and our federation is good in supporting, helping you find those kind of outlets to get that stuff.
Which is good. But what job do you do alongside the bobsled then?
Yeah, I'm a diplomat, so I work in sport diplomacy. So a lot of my job is, man, talking about sports internationally, and I help arrange sending our sport envoys from America, coaches and players overseas to do different camps and clinics, and it's a passion of mine that I didn't even know I had until I lived in China. So it's a full circle. It all comes back, and I find myself now kind of building my own personal brand of being an international athlete through bobsleigh, and then my career and passion in international sports. And basically my theory is sports are kind of the universal unifying thing. Everybody can get together and watch a game of football, right? Watch a match. You've seen it in guitar. You've seen it. It brings the world together in a way that politics and everything else can't do. The only other thing that I think can bring people together is food and sports. So I think that's the main thing. And man, it's a passion of mine. And I got a couple of side projects I'm working on, or I would love to do. Doing more speaking engagements internationally with the power of sports, and then I really want to kind of explore doing a small docuseries of different cultural sports and how they relate to a culture's identity through food and tradition and drinks and all that good stuff. So
yeah, that's super interesting, because I'd love to do something like along those lines, of like going to a football match, for example, and just rather than talking about the football, speaking to the fans and understanding what draws them back week on week on week, because
right.
It's such a passion, like it's everything for people, and to actually go and understand it, because I'm not sure if you've seen it, but the Welcome to Wrexham documentary on Disney Plus. So essentially a club in the UK in Wales called Wrexham, bought out by Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney. And the club had struggled for, I think it was 15 years. The longest time they'd spent out of the Football League. So we have 4 divisions, and then after that is outside of the Football League. So the longest time they'd spent out of it. They've bought the club, but they went around interviewing the fans and speaking to, the owners of the pub who own the pub outside the ground, and they talk about that club as if it's like everything to them, and it will be their dying breath to talk about Wrexham. And to me, it's fascinating how people can, it becomes everything. Like jobs don't matter,
right.
Like problems don't matter because of that sport specifically.
Yeah, man. I've always said, I told my friends in England, man, like I've never been to a professional. I've never been to a legit football match. I've seen a couple MLS teams play here in the United States. I want to come to a Liverpool and Manchester United game match and just experience it and bandwagon the home team and just talk all the shit. Like that's what I want to do, man. Like, and I want to experience that. I want to talk to the fans, and I want to be in that atmosphere. And then I want to do the same thing with a cricket match in Pakistan or India, and just go and experience and like, hey man, like what, and start interviewing people and say like, what about this do you love, and why do you keep coming back to it? Right? I think it's interesting. It plays into the whole cultural identity of sports and what it does in bringing people together. And I always think about back in the day, like when you think about the Roman Empire and they had gladiators competing in the Colosseum, like essentially that's the precursor to modern day sports, right? That and the ancient Olympics, like it brought people together from different city-states and warring parts of the world that they knew of at the time, and sports was a unifying factor for them to compete instead of killing each other, which they did still, but whatever.
No, the different cultures in different sports is something that's always fascinated me, because like not necessarily the highest level, like you said you wanted to go to a Liverpool United game. When you go below that and you see the people who their teams aren't successful,
Right.
but there's just something ingrained in their DNA that they love this team. They, they follow this athlete or what have you. They follow these events, and it's so fascinating that they can do that and carry on doing that even without the success. Like, being a Liverpool fan's great because recent years we've won everything we can win. Great. So, but being like a Barnsley fan, where you're getting relegated one season, then you maybe stuck there for 2 years, you come back up a league, and then you go back down again. Like,
Right.
understanding what makes people tick at that level is super interesting to me.
Yeah, dude. It is awesome. That is something that I want to keep exploring, and God willing, with my career, and I'm open to everything. So any opportunity that I'll always say yes. So hopefully keep exploring this route and put something together. I think it'd be super cool. But
yeah. So going back to the bobsled, and obviously the competition side of things, where are some of the places that this has managed to take you to in the world?
I've only competed in the United States so far. So hopefully next season the goal is to get to Europe. That was kind of my goal this season. The pilot I was working with, he didn't really, it wasn't really the same goal for him. So it's kind of hard on that side for me. Kind of being married to a pilot is, your success as a push athlete is, it is up to him, right, to make the race. And so this next season is really to get to Europe, man. And there's a bunch of tracks in Europe. Germany's got 2, Switzerland has 1, Austria has 1, France has 1, but not really many people go to that one. There's one in Norway. So, yeah, man. And bobsleigh in Europe is big. My girlfriend was in Europe touring for 2 months this past season, and she was telling me, like, all the time, there are fans in Germany that know your name because bobsleigh is something they grow up doing. And it's sick, dude. It is cool.
So what things are you putting in place now to try and push yourself to get to Europe, being obviously the goal?
Right. We just got done with our national champs. That's what I was doing last week, and got first place in the 4-man, which is great. It was great.
Congrats, mate.
Thanks. Yeah, it wasn't a big pool of people competing, but just to show up and get more practice and just keep hammering and just keep doing the hard thing that everybody's not willing to do. I think that's where a lot of people where you can make up a lot of progress and just keep showing up. And for me right now, it's taking a step back and saying, like, hey, the season's over. Let's take a break. Let's kind of focus on the other aspects of your life and kind of recover. And then once it's time to get hammering at the season again, it's full bore. And like, it's make this a reality. And there's the only way to do that is through hard work. So, but measurable wise, I've got some numbers I want to be hitting, get back on the strict diet plan. But for right now, I'm going to enjoy some cold beer. Yeah, dude. So, yeah.
So on that, the hard work and stuff like that, for anyone who wants to make it as an athlete at any level in any sport, what 3 things would you tell them to do?
You got to be dedicated. Don't be 1 foot in, 1 foot out. If you make up your mind to do something, commit to it fully, because at the end of the day, like I said, you might fail, but you are going to be a better person at the end. And just commitment. And the second thing would probably be just integrity to yourself and to your teammates. Don't be a troublemaker. Don't be somebody that it's all about them. Be humble be ambitious in your aspirations, but humble in your actions, right? Have great goals, but be an even better teammate, right? And then 3 is just keep your head down and work, man. Like, a lot of people say this, and a lot of people, you've seen them on Instagram, the guys that just want to, film all their workouts and, just talk about what they're doing. But the real people, the real guys that I know that are having the best success are the ones that put that away, and they just put their nose to the grindstone when nobody's watching and just work and just push that limit every day. And so that's the main 3 things I would tell people. If you're willing to do those 3 things, then, it's not going to be hard for you to find success.
Love it, mate. Absolutely love it. I'll ask you one final question, because I feel like we've touched every base that we could touch. But the final question that I ask everyone is, how would you like to be remembered?
Man, that's a question I ask myself every day. I want to be remembered as a great man, as a loving man, God willing, a husband and a father, and somebody that inspired people to go out and live their dreams and do hard things and not have to worry about, what if I don't do this, right? I want to live an interesting life. I want to be an inspiration. I want to be a role model, and I want to give back to people. And if giving back is through, my failures and lessons that I've learned along the way, then, man, that's enough for me, dude. Like it's an honor, and a lot of it's just having these conversations with people like yourself, and hopefully somebody listening to this that's kind of on the fence about doing bobsleigh or a winter sport or anything crazy, buying a plane ticket to moving overseas. Man, if that's you and you're listening to this, just do it, man. Like it's not, you will be so rewarded at the end than just not doing it. So
love it, mate. Just let everyone know how they can support you and where they can find you online and stuff.
Yeah, man, you can find me on Instagram, emarky80, on Twitter, emarky80, which I'm not really big on Twitter. Instagram's my big platform. I'm hopefully going to have a website out soon, kind of where you can support, follow my journeys, and I kind of start to launch my business as like a speaker and traveler, and I want to get more engaged, and especially with those listening and those that want to get in touch. My DMs are always open. My email is the same as my Instagram handle, so it's emarky80@gmail.com. If you want to reach out and you got questions about winter sports, bobsleigh, football, training, living overseas, I'm an open book. So
appreciate it, mate. Really appreciate you coming on.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate it, brother.
Thank you to everyone who made it all the way through the episode. I really enjoyed this one with Elliot. He's such a great guy, such a great high performance mindset, and he's going to go so far in the sport. I can already see it. So all the best to Elliot and his career as a bobsled athlete. And yeah, make sure you check him out in the link in the description, and also check out everything to do with the podcast, TikTok, Instagram, what have you, all in the link in the description. Also watch out on the social media for a possible giveaway that will be coming in the coming weeks. I have something planned, and yeah, just be aware that something's coming and it's going to be something great. So make sure you're watching out for that. I will see you next Monday for another episode of the Content Podcast.